You are being charged with unlawful trespassing." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. I stared at the police officer, then looked out at the wooden gate where I had just hung my "No Trespass" sign 2 days ago. My hands started shaking. This was my land. 8 acres. The deed sat in my kitchen drawer. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. But the cold smile on Brenda Sullivan's face, the HOA president standing beside her white Mercedes, told me this was no accident. 24 hours ago, I was a retired geological engineer looking for peace. Now I had become a criminal on my own property. The morning had started quietly. I woke at 6:30 a.m., made breakfast, and stood on the porch looking out at the mountains. The air was crisp, clean, the kind that makes you remember why you left the city. My father died of cancer 18 months ago, and in those final weeks, he told me to find a place where I could breathe, where no one would tell me what color to paint my mailbox or how tall my grass could grow. So I bought this land, 8 acres of pine trees, wildflowers, and silence. Sitting just outside Greenbriar Meadows, a planned community with a homeowners association that charged $2,400 a year and had rules about everything. I made sure I was outside their jurisdiction. I hired Helen Moss, a real estate attorney with 30 years of experience. She reviewed the title, checked the county survey maps from 1987, and walked the property line with me. She pointed to an old iron stake buried in the brush near Creek Trail Road and said, "That is your western boundary. Marcus, 320 feet outside the HOA. You do not owe them anything." I trusted her. I trusted the documents. I closed escrow on June 14th and moved into the cabin 2 weeks later. For 3 months, I lived quietly, repaired the roof, cleared brush, and planted a small vegetable garden. But there were signs that something was off. Twice. I noticed fresh tire tracks near the eastern edge of my property, and once I found one of my boundary markers knocked over, when I went to the county planning office in August to file a permit for a shed. I saw Brenda Sullivan arguing with a clerk about fence variances, her voice sharp and certain, like someone used to getting her way. She looked at me when I walked past, just for a second, and I felt it, a coldness, a calculation. That is when I started keeping notes, dates, times, anything unusual. I did not know what she wanted, but I knew she was watching. Then, 2 days ago, I hung a simple wooden sign on my gate. No trespass, private property. It was not a threat. It was a boundary. A line I drew not just on the land, but in my life. I had spent my whole career in engineering firms where someone always had authority over my schedule, my projects, and my decisions. I did not want that anymore. I thought the sign would be enough. I thought I was safe. On Saturday morning in late September, I heard gravel crunch under tires at 7 a.m. I walked to the window and saw a county patrol car pulling up to my gate. Behind it, a white Mercedes with vanity plates that read GBM Meadow. Brenda Sullivan stepped out, arms folded, watching as a young officer in a crisp uniform walked up to my door. I opened it before he could knock. "Good morning, officer," I said, keeping my voice steady. He looked at me, then down at a clipboard. "Are you the owner of this property?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Marcus Hayes. I bought it 3 months ago." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to decide how to phrase something uncomfortable. "We received a report that you are trespassing on land that belongs to the Greenbriar Meadows Homeowners Association," he said. His tone was polite, but I could hear the confusion in it, like he did not quite believe what he was reading. I stared at him. Then I looked past him at Brenda Sullivan, still standing by the gate with that cold smile. "Officer," I said carefully, "this is my land. I have the deed, the title report, and the county survey map. Would you like to see them?" He hesitated, glancing back at Brenda. She took a step forward, her heels crunching on the gravel. Officer Williams, she said, her voice bright and confident. This property is within the updated boundaries of Greenbriar Meadows as of our most recent filing. Mr. Hayes has been informed multiple times that he is in violation of our community standards, and yet he continues to disregard our authority. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Updated boundaries, I repeated. She smiled. Yes. We submitted revised maps to the City Council earlier this year to reflect current property assessments. Mr. Hayes's land falls within our jurisdiction, and he has refused to comply with our requests for proper permits and association fees. I could feel my pulse in my temples now. A slow, steady drumbeat of anger I was trying to keep under control. I looked at Officer Williams. That is not true, I said. I checked the official county records. No updated map changes my property status. The officer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, he said to Brenda, do you have documentation of this boundary change? She pulled a folder from her car and handed it to him. He flipped through it, frowning. Mr. Hayes, he said, I'm going to need you to provide your own documents so we can clarify this. I am not arresting you, but I do need to file a report. I nodded, went inside, and came back with my deed, title report, and the survey map Helen Moss had given me. The officer looked at both sets of papers, then shook his head. This is a civil matter, he said. You two need to work this out with the county or through your attorneys. I am not equipped to make a legal determination here. Brenda's smile did not waver. Thank you. Officer Williams, she said. I am sure Mr. Hayes will do the right thing once he understands the consequences of continued noncompliance. The officer left. Brenda stayed for a moment longer, looking at me through the gate like she was measuring something. Then she got back in her Mercedes and drove away. I stood on my porch, hands still trembling, staring at the sign I had hung with such confidence. I thought about my father, about the way he had looked at me in that hospital room and said, "Do not let anyone take your peace. Marcus, do not let them make you small." I went back inside, pulled out my notebook, and wrote down everything that had just happened. The time, the names, the documents she had shown. The phrase updated boundaries. I flipped back through the pages, past the tire tracks, the knocked-over marker, the cold look she gave me at the county office. 12 weeks of small warnings I had been collecting without fully understanding why. Now I knew. Brenda Sullivan thought I would be afraid. She thought I would fold. She did not know I had been preparing for exactly this moment. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of tea going cold in front of me, staring at the documents spread across the wood, the deed, the title report, the survey map from 1987 with the county seal stamped in faded blue ink. Everything looked legitimate. Everything felt solid. But Brenda Sullivan had walked onto my property with a folder full of papers and a police officer. And she had smiled like the fight was already over. I kept replaying her words. Updated boundaries. Most recent filing. She had rewritten the map. And now I needed to figure out why she thought she could get away with it. The next morning, I drove into town and parked outside a small diner called the Bluebird. It was the kind of place where locals gathered, where the coffee was strong and the gossip was reliable. I ordered breakfast and sat at the counter, listening. 2 men in flannel shirts talked about a timber contract. A woman with gray hair complained about property taxes. Then I heard it. A younger guy, maybe 30, said to his friend, "Did you hear the Hoffmans sold their place?" "Yeah," the friend replied. "Got lowballed too. Some LLC bought it for half what it was worth." The first guy shook his head. "That is the 3rd one this year. All around Greenbriar." I set down my fork and turned slightly. "Excuse me," I said. "You mentioned an LLC buying properties. Do you know the name?" The guy looked at me, hesitant, then shrugged. "Pinewood Holdings, I think. They have been picking up land on the edges of the HOA for a while now, always after people get hit with violations or legal threats." I thanked him, paid my bill, and left. Back at the cabin, I opened my laptop and started searching. Pinewood Holdings, LLC. Within 20 minutes, I found the business registration filed with the state. The listed address was a law office in the next county over, the same firm that represented Greenbriar Meadows HOA. Public property records showed 4 parcels purchased by Pinewood in the past 18 months, all within a half-mile of Greenbriar boundaries. Each sale had happened after the previous owners faced harassment from the HOA. Fines, legal disputes, threats of liens. The pattern was unmistakable. Then I found the name that made everything click. The registered agent for Pinewood Holdings LLC was Gerald Sullivan, Brenda's husband. This was not about community standards. This was a land grab, slow and methodical, using the HOA as leverage to force people out and buy their property cheap. And I was next. I saved the records, then walked outside to the edge of my property, looking west toward Creek Trail Road. Somewhere in the brush was the original boundary marker Helen Moss had shown me, the iron stake that proved where my land ended and the HOA began. If Brenda had submitted a revised map, she would have done it without changing the physical evidence. That meant her map was fiction. But I needed proof. I spent the afternoon walking the property line, looking for anything out of place. I found fresh tire tracks near the eastern fence, deep ruts like someone had stopped and gotten out. I found a section of brush that had been recently cleared, exposing ground that should have been untouched. And then, near the base of an old pine tree, I found it. A wooden survey stake, new, painted bright orange, was driven into the ground about 15 feet inside my property. It had not been there 3 weeks ago. Someone had placed it there deliberately, trying to manufacture a new boundary. I crouched down and saw faint lettering stamped into the wood GSC, Gerald Sullivan Consulting. I took photos from every angle, measured the distance from my cabin, and marked the location on my map. This was not bureaucratic confusion. This was fraud. Brenda and Gerald had planted false markers to support their fake boundary claim, hoping I would not notice or would not care enough to fight back. They were building a case on lies, and they were counting on me to fold under pressure. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and felt something shift inside me. The anger I had been holding back since yesterday morning sharpened into focus. They thought I was just another person who would panic, hire a lawyer, and either pay up or sell out. They did not know I had spent 20 years reading data, tracing patterns, solving problems other people missed, finding the flaw in the system. That was what I did. I went back inside and called Helen Moss. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice calm and professional. "Marcus," she said. "What can I do for you?" I told her everything. The police visit, Brenda's claim about updated boundaries, the fake survey stake with Gerald's company name stamped on it, the connection between Pinewood Holdings and the Sullivans. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You need to get an independent land survey done immediately. I can recommend someone, a man named Jake Brennan. He has been doing this for 15 years, and he does not cut corners. Get him out there. Have him document the original markers, and file a formal dispute with the county. If Brenda submitted a fraudulent map, we can prove it. But you need hard evidence. Marcus, you need more than just your word against hers." I thanked her and hung up. I stood at the window, looking out at the mountains, at the land I had bought to escape exactly this kind of fight. My father used to say that peace was not something you found. It was something you built. But now his words felt different, sharper, like a warning I had not fully understood until this moment. Peace was not given. It was defended, and defending it required more than good intentions. It required proof, strategy, and the willingness to stand when someone tried to push you off your own ground. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down Jake Brennan's name. Then I added a line beneath it. Find the original iron stake. Document everything. Make them prove their lie in public. Brenda Sullivan thought she had already won, but the fight had just started, and I was not going anywhere. 3 days after the police visit, I found an envelope in my mailbox. It had been left overnight. No postage, no carrier stamp, just my name written in neat block letters across the front. Someone had delivered it by hand. I opened it standing at the end of my driveway, and the first line made my stomach tighten. Notice of violation. The letter was on Greenbriar Meadows HOA letterhead, signed by Brenda Sullivan as board president. It stated I violated multiple community standards, including unauthorized construction on HOA property, failure to submit architectural plans, and installation of signage without consent. It demanded I remove the no trespass sign and submit a formal application for HOA membership within 14 days. Failure to comply would result in legal action and fines up to $5,000. I read it twice, then looked up at my cabin. At the land I knew was mine. This was not a mistake. This was a declaration of war. I went inside, scanned the letter, and emailed it to Helen Moss with a single line, "They are escalating." She called 20 minutes later. "Marcus," she said, "this letter has no legal standing. You are not a member of their HOA. They cannot enforce violations on property outside their jurisdiction." "I know," I said. "But they are acting like they can. Send them a formal response," she said. "Attach your deed, title report, and county survey map. State clearly that your property is outside their boundaries. Keep copies of everything. If they continue, we will file a cease and desist." I spent the next hour drafting my response, citing the survey map from 1987, parcel number 047-23-1158, and coordinates for the original boundary markers. I sent it via email and certified mail. 4 days later, another envelope appeared. The second notice was thicker, with an itemized list and a payment demand for $5,000. It claimed that according to updated boundary maps, filed in March of 2024, my property now fell within Greenbriar Meadows jurisdiction. It stated I had been notified multiple times, which was a lie, and that my refusal constituted willful disregard of community standards. At the bottom, in bold, failure to remit payment within 10 days will result in a lien and legal proceedings. The planted orange stake with Gerald's name. The Pinewood purchases. Now these letters. All pieces of the same coordinated push. They were building a fake legal case, counting on me to fold. I called the HOA office. A woman answered. "Greenbriar Meadows Homeowners Association. How can I help you?" "My name is Marcus Hayes," I said. "I received a violation notice and need to speak with someone." There was a pause. "Mr. Hayes," she said slowly, "your account shows multiple outstanding violations." "I do not have an account with your HOA," I said. "My property is not within your boundaries. I have documentation proving that. I am sorry, sir, but our records indicate otherwise. If you believe there is an error, submit a formal dispute in writing." "I already did that 4 days ago," I said. "I sent the county survey map. I do not see anything in our system," she said. "You may want to resend it, and the payment deadline still applies." I hung up. They were not interested in facts. They were creating an obstruction, hoping I would give up. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at both letters. Brenda was flooding me with paperwork and threats, betting I would either pay to make it go away or spend more fighting. Either way, she won, if I paid. I admitted her authority, if I fought. I bled money and time until I sold like the others. It was efficient, calculated, and would have worked on someone who did not see the pattern. But I had spent 20 years analyzing systems, finding weaknesses, tracing logic back to the source. The weakness was obvious. Brenda's strategy relied entirely on her updated boundary map being legitimate. If I could prove it was not, everything collapsed. I called Jake Brennan, the surveyor Helen recommended. He answered on the second ring. "Brennan here." "Mr. Brennan," I said, "my name is Marcus Hayes. Helen Moss gave me your number. I need a property survey done as soon as possible. I have a boundary dispute with an HOA claiming my land falls within their jurisdiction." "Greenbriar Meadows?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "How did you know?" "Because you are not the first person to call me about them," he said. I did survey work for a family 2 years ago. Same issue. HOA claimed their land, threatened fines, and when they could not afford to fight, they sold. I can be out there tomorrow afternoon. That works, I said. He gave me a time and hung up. I looked out at the mountains. Somewhere out there was the original iron stake, the proof that Brenda's map was a lie. Tomorrow, Jake would find it, and I would have what I needed to go on the offensive. Brenda thought she was tightening a noose. She thought I would panic, but she had made a mistake. She had put her lies in writing, created a paper trail connecting fake boundary claims to financial demands and threats. Every piece was evidence. I opened my laptop and made digital copies of both letters, the survey map, the deed, and photos of the fake stake. I uploaded everything to a backup drive and emailed duplicates to Helen, if this went to court. I needed every document ready. My father's words came back, but they no longer read like comfort. They were a summons. Peace was not something you waited for. It was something you fought to protect. I opened my notebook and wrote survey scheduled. October 3rd, find the iron stake, document everything. Then I added, they think they are squeezing me, but every letter they send is another piece of their own undoing. Brenda Sullivan had underestimated me, and that was going to cost her everything. Jake Brennan arrived the next afternoon at 2 p.m., driving a white pickup truck with surveying equipment strapped in the bed. He was in his late 40s, lean and weathered, with the kind of hands that had spent years working outdoors. We shook hands on my porch, and he looked out at the property with a surveyor's eye, already calculating angles and distances. You said Greenbriar is claiming this land falls inside their boundaries, he said. That is correct, I replied. They sent me violation notices and a $5,000 fine based on what they call updated maps filed in March. But my deed and the original county survey from 1987 say otherwise. He nodded slowly. Let me guess. They are also buying up land around here through an LLC. I stared at him. How did you know? Because I have seen this before, he said. Same HOA, same pattern. People get squeezed out. Then a company called Pinewood Holdings buys their land for pennies on the dollar, owned by Gerald Sullivan, Brenda's husband. We walked the western edge of my property toward Creek Trail Road, where Helen Moss had shown me the original iron boundary stake months ago. Jake carried a metal detector and a GPS unit, moving methodically through the brush. The ground was uneven, covered in pine needles and wild grass. Here, I said, pointing to a cluster of young trees near an old stone marker. Helen showed me the stake right around here. Jake swept the metal detector in slow arcs. Within 2 minutes, he stopped. There it is. He crouched down, cleared away the dirt, and pulled out a rusted iron stake with a faded county stamp from 1987 still visible on the top. For a moment, I just stared at it. This small piece of metal, buried and forgotten, was the proof that everything Brenda had said was a lie. Jake recorded the coordinates with his GPS, then pulled up a digital overlay of the county GIS map on his tablet. He traced the original plat lines with his finger. This stake sits exactly on the boundary documented in the county system, he said. Your land is 320 feet outside Greenbriar's jurisdiction. Their updated map does not match any official record. Whoever filed it either made an error or committed fraud. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of tension I had been carrying since the police knocked on my door. This is the proof I need, I said. Can you document this officially? He nodded. I will prepare a full boundary survey report with GPS coordinates, photographs, and a comparison to the county records. It will take me about a week. But Marcus, he said, his tone shifting, you need to understand something. This HOA does not care about facts. They care about pressure. I worked with a family 2 years ago, the Baileys. Same situation. Greenbriar claimed their land, threatened legal action, and eventually, they could not afford to keep fighting. They sold to Pinewood for half what the property was worth. There were others, too. A couple named the Reynoldses, an older man named Frank Cochran, Every time. The same pattern. Disputes, threats, exhaustion, sale, and every time. Pinewood was waiting. Jake handed me his business card as we walked back toward the cabin. "I will have the survey report done by next Friday," he said. "When you are ready to fight this publicly, call me. I will testify. But be careful. Marcus, they do not forget who crosses them." He climbed into his truck and drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway with the weight of what I had just learned. I was not the first. I was just the latest in a line of people Brenda Sullivan had targeted, pressured, and pushed off their land. But I was the first one who had seen it coming, the first one who had kept records, the first one who was not going to fold. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I searched for the names Jake had mentioned and found property records confirming all 3 sales to Pinewood Holdings within the past 3 years. I cross-referenced the dates with HOA meeting minutes posted on Greenbriar's website, in each case, just months before the sale. There had been a community vote to approve boundary adjustments or fee increases. The votes had passed narrowly, always with Brenda Sullivan presiding. It was not just about buying cheap land. It was about control. Every parcel Pinewood acquired gave her more leverage, more authority, more revenue. She had been doing it systematically, one property at a time, and no one had connected the dots until now. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This was not an isolated case. This was a system, a scheme, and Brenda Sullivan was running it. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a new entry, "The Pattern." Underneath, I listed the families Jake had mentioned, the fact that all had sold to Pinewood after HOA disputes, and the connection to Brenda's votes on boundary changes. Then I added my own name at the bottom with a single word beside it: different. I was different because I had seen the warning signs. I had documentation. I had Jake's testimony. And now I had proof that Brenda's operation was not a series of coincidences, but a calculated effort to reshape the neighborhood for profit. Every letter she sent me, every threat, every lie, was another piece of evidence I could use against her. She thought she was tightening a noose. She was building my case. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the darkening sky. My father used to say that the truth does not need to shout. It just needs to be patient. But I was done being patient. Patience had let Brenda hurt the Baileys, the Reynoldses, Frank Cochran, and who knows how many others. Patience had given her years to perfect this scheme. My father believed the truth could wait. I no longer could. Tomorrow, I would start building the case that would bring Brenda Sullivan's entire operation into the light. Not just for my 8 acres, but for every family she had pushed off their land. The fight was no longer just about boundaries. It was about justice. And I was going to make sure she answered for every single lie. The 10-day deadline came and went. I did not pay. I did not respond. I waited. On the morning of October 10th, I received a third letter from the HOA. The polite language was gone. This one was blunt, threatening to file a lien against my property within 72 hours if I did not comply. The tone had shifted from bureaucratic warning to open aggression. Brenda was escalating because she expected me to crack, to scramble for a settlement that would admit her authority over my land. But I was not scrambling. I was gathering evidence. And the next piece arrived that Friday afternoon when Jake Brennan pulled into my driveway with a manila envelope in his hand. He stepped out of his truck and handed me the envelope without ceremony. "That is your official boundary survey," he said. "Your property is definitively outside the Greenbriar Meadows HOA jurisdiction by 320 feet. Any claim otherwise is unsupported by physical evidence or county records." I opened the envelope and flipped through the pages. The report was thorough, professional, and irrefutable. It included satellite imagery with boundary lines overlaid, close-up photos of the original iron stake, and a side-by-side comparison of the maps. The original boundary stopped at Creek Trail Road. The updated boundary Brenda had drawn cut 15 feet past my cabin. It was not a mistake. It was a fabrication, deliberate and documented. I looked up at Jake. This is exactly what I needed. He nodded, but his expression was serious. Marcus, I need to tell you something else. When I filed this survey with the county yesterday, I checked their records for any boundary amendments submitted by Greenbriar Meadows. There is nothing. No application, no approval, no public hearing. If Brenda told the city council she submitted an updated map in March, she either lied or submitted it to the wrong department. Either way, it has no legal standing. I felt something shift inside me, a cold clarity that burned away the last traces of doubt. So everything she has been threatening me with is based on a map that does not officially exist. That is correct, Jake said. And if you take this to the county, they will confirm it, but be ready. Once you do that, she is going to come at you harder. People like Brenda do not back down when they are caught. They double down. After Jake left, I sat on my porch with the survey report in my lap. For weeks, I had been reacting, defending, trying to hold my ground while Brenda controlled the narrative. But now the balance had shifted. She had overplayed her hand. She had put lies in writing, created fake stakes, and built an entire case on a map that did not exist, and I had documented every step. The question now was not whether I could win. It was how publicly I wanted her to lose. I thought about the Baileys, the Reynoldses, Frank Cochran. All of them had fought privately, quietly, and lost. They had tried to negotiate, to settle, to make the problem go away without making waves, and Brenda had crushed them one by one. I was not going to make that mistake. If I were going to fight, I was going to fight in the open, where she could not hide. I called Helen Moss and told her about the survey. She was silent for a moment after I finished. Marcus, she said carefully, this changes everything. With Jake's report, you can file a cease and desist and demand they stop all harassment immediately. If they continue, we can sue for abuse of process and possibly fraud. But if you want to go further, if you want to expose what they have been doing to other properties, you need to take this to the city council. There is a public meeting in 2 weeks. You can request time to speak, present your evidence, and put it on the record. Once it is public, the county will have to investigate. I asked her what the risks were. She did not sugarcoat it. Brenda will fight back, she said. She will hire lawyers. She will try to discredit you and Jake. She will make this as ugly as possible. But if your evidence is solid, and it is, she will lose. The question is whether you are ready for that fight. I looked out at the mountains, at the land I had bought to escape conflict, to build something quiet and mine. I thought about my father, about the way he had looked at me in that hospital room and told me not to let anyone make me small. I thought about the families who had lost their homes because no one had stood up and said enough. And I realized that this was not just about my 8 acres anymore. It was about drawing a line, not just on a map, but in principle. Some fights you walk away from. Some you have to see through. I took a breath and said the words that changed everything. I am ready. Let's do it. Helen's tone shifted immediately, sharp and focused. Good. Then we need to start preparing now. I will draft the cease and desist letter and file it today. You need to register to speak at the city council meeting and start organizing your presentation. Bring the survey, the letters, the photos of the fake stake, everything. Make it clear, make it visual, and make it undeniable. I hung up and opened my laptop. The city council meeting was scheduled for October 18th at 7 p.m. I found the public comment registration form, filled it out, and submitted it. Subject: fraudulent boundary claims and harassment by Greenbriar Meadows HOA. My hands were steady. I was not reacting anymore. I was leading. Over the next few days, I prepared. I printed enlarged copies of both maps and laid them side by side so the fabrication was impossible to miss. I created a timeline of events with dates, documents, and photos. I included the fake orange survey stake with Gerald's company name stamped on it and excerpts from Brenda's letters highlighting her claims about updated boundaries. I also reached out to Tom Ridley, my neighbor who had lived here for 40 years. He agreed to attend the meeting and, if needed. Testify about what the boundaries used to look like before Greenbriar started expanding. Every piece was falling into place. Not just a defense, but a case. Not just my word against hers, but proof. The night before the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table and went over my notes one last time. I was not nervous. I was clear. Brenda Sullivan had spent years building this scheme in the shadows, using the HOA as a weapon, counting on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. But I was neither. And tomorrow, I was going to drag everything she had done into the light. I looked out the window at the no trespass sign still hanging on my gate, lit by the porch light. It had started as a simple boundary marker, a statement of ownership. Now it was something more. It was not just a sign anymore. It was a promise that some things are worth defending, no matter the cost. And tomorrow, Brenda would learn what happens when you push someone who refuses to move. 2 days before the city council meeting, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was local but unfamiliar. I answered cautiously. Marcus Hayes, a man's voice asked. Yes, I said. Who is this? My name is Paul Jennings. I used to be on the Greenbriar Meadows HOA board. I resigned last year because I could not stand what Brenda Sullivan was doing. I heard you were going to speak at the council meeting, and I think you should know what you are up against. I sat down slowly, my pulse quickening. I am listening, I said. Paul spoke carefully, like someone who had been holding something heavy for too long and was finally ready to set it down. His voice was tired, edged with guilt. I was on the board for 3 years, he said. At first, I thought Brenda was just passionate about community standards, but in early 2024, she started pushing for boundary revisions. She said it was about clarifying property lines and increasing neighborhood cohesion. But the way she talked about it in private meetings made me uncomfortable. She kept mentioning revenue potential and expansion opportunities. When I asked for documentation, she brushed me off. Then I found out her husband owned Pinewood Holdings. Paul told me that in February of 2024, Brenda held a closed board meeting where she proposed submitting revised boundary maps to the city council. She claimed it was a routine administrative update, nothing that required a public vote. Paul objected, arguing that changing boundaries without notifying affected property owners was unethical and possibly illegal. Brenda shut him down. 2 other board members sided with her. Paul abstained, and the motion passed. A month later, he resigned, before he left. He saved copies of emails Brenda had sent to the board and to Gerald. There is one email in particular you need to see, he said quietly. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have stopped her. But I was afraid. I still am. But if I do not help you now, she will just keep doing this. Can you send it to me? I asked. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, Yes, tonight. But Marcus, be careful. Brenda does not just have money and lawyers. She has connections, people on the planning commission, people in the county office. When you go public, she will come at you with everything. An hour later, the email arrived in my inbox. I opened the attachment and felt the air leave my lungs. The email was dated March 27th, 2024. Sent from Brenda Sullivan to Gerald Sullivan, with the subject line, Q2 targets. The body was short and direct. Parcel 1158 adjacent to Creek Trail is the next priority. The owner purchased in June. Outside the current boundaries, but within the revised zone. Standard pressure sequence violation notices. Fee escalation. Lien threat. They will not survive the legal fees. Closing estimated Q4. Expected margin of 40 to 50% after holdco acquisition. I stared at the screen. Standard pressure sequence. Expected margin. They had not just targeted me. They had built an industry out of it. Every letter, every threat, every fabricated claim had been planned before I even moved into my cabin. I was not a person to them. I was a parcel number and a profit margin. I forwarded the email to Helen Moss with a single line, "This is the smoking gun." She called immediately, her voice sharp with controlled intensity. "Marcus, this is extraordinary. It proves premeditation, coordination, and intent to defraud. If you present this at the meeting, it will be devastating. But Brenda will fight back hard. She will claim it is fake or out of context. You need authentication and corroboration." "I have Jake's survey," I said. "The fake stake, the timeline, Paul's testimony. And now this." She exhaled slowly. "Then this is no longer just a property dispute. This is fraud, conspiracy. You are about to dismantle her entire operation. Are you ready?" I looked down at the email on my screen, at the cold calculation in every word. "Yes," I said. "I am ready." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and slid the email into the front of my presentation folder. Everything I had gathered over the past weeks, every document, every photo, every piece of testimony, formed a single, irrefutable narrative. Brenda Sullivan had weaponized the HOA to exploit people, turn bureaucracy into profit, and destroy anyone who resisted. And she had gotten away with it because no one had ever connected the pieces. Until now. I thought about Paul Jennings, his voice weary with guilt, choosing to act despite his fear. I thought about Jake Brennan risking retaliation to document the truth. I thought about Tom Ridley agreeing to testify about boundaries that had been erased. They had all seen what Brenda was doing. They had all decided to stand. I looked out the window at the dark outline of the mountains. In 2 days, I would walk into that city council meeting and put everything on the record. The fabricated maps, the planted stakes, the emails. The pattern of targeted harassment spans years. Brenda Sullivan would have to answer for all of it, not in private, not behind closed doors, but in public, in front of witnesses, where the truth could not be buried or dismissed. I was not defending my land anymore. I was ending her scheme. And the people standing with me, the ones who had refused to stay silent, were proof that some lies are too big to hide once someone shines a light. I closed the folder and set it by the door. Ready. Nothing she could do now would stop what was coming. The morning of October 16th. I woke to find another envelope in my mailbox. This one was different. Heavier paper, law firm letterhead, certified mail receipt attached. I opened it standing in my driveway, the autumn air cold against my face. The letter was from Hammond & Associates, representing Greenbriar Meadows HOA. It informed me that due to my continued refusal to comply, the HOA was initiating formal legal proceedings. A hearing was scheduled for November 5th. The letter also stated that any public statements I made regarding the HOA or its board members could be considered defamatory and subject to additional legal action. At the bottom, in bold type, "We strongly advise you to seek legal counsel immediately." This was Brenda's countermove. She knew I had registered to speak at the city council meeting. She knew I had evidence, and now she was trying to intimidate me into silence before I could use it. I called Helen Moss and read her the letter. She listened without interrupting, then let out a sharp breath. "Classic intimidation tactic," she said. "They know you have something damaging, and they are trying to shut you down before you say it. Can they actually sue me for defamation if I present facts?" I asked. "Technically. Truth is an absolute defense," she said. "If everything you say is documented and provable, they have no case. But they can still drag you into court and bleed you dry with legal fees. That is the point. They do not need to win. They just need to make it expensive." I felt the anger settle into something colder, sharper. "I am not backing down," I said. "Good," Helen replied, her voice steady and fierce. "Then neither am I. They can threaten us all they want. We are still showing up, and when we do, we are putting everything on the record." That same afternoon, I received a phone call from a woman named Grace Milton. She lived in Greenbriar Meadows and had heard I was speaking at the council meeting. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, 3 years ago, Brenda did to me what she is doing to you. I owned a small lot on the eastern edge. She threatened me with $10,000 in fines over a setback violation I never committed. I could not afford a lawyer, so I sold it to Pinewood Holdings for half what it was worth. I did not know Brenda's husband owned it until it was too late. I have been too afraid to say anything, but if you are willing to stand up, then so am I. I will testify." Her voice trembled, but there was steel underneath. I thanked her, and within hours, 2 more calls came. Robert Sharp, who had lost his land 4 years ago after the HOA claimed his shed violated the code. Linda Frost, whose elderly parents had been forced out over fabricated drainage violations. Each story was different in detail but identical in structure. Pressure, threats, exhaustion, sale, and always. Pinewood Holdings is waiting in the wings. By evening, I had 4 people willing to testify publicly about what Brenda and Gerald Sullivan had done. 4 voices that would corroborate the pattern Jake and Paul had described. 4 pieces of a story that was bigger than my 8 acres. This was not just about me anymore. It was about every person Brenda had pushed off their land, every family she had exploited, every quiet theft that had gone unanswered because no one had the resources or the courage to fight back. But now, they did. Because I was fighting, and they were standing with me. The next morning, I drove into town and spent 3 hours at a print shop. I organized Jake's survey report, Paul's email, the photos of the fake stake, the timeline of harassment, and the written statements from Grace, Robert, and Linda. I printed everything in triplicate and mounted the 2 maps on foam boards so the fabrication would be impossible to miss. It felt like gearing up for battle. Every document was a weapon, every piece of evidence was a shield, and every witness was proof that the truth was not mine alone to carry. That afternoon, Brenda made her move. A mass email went out to every household in Greenbriar Meadows from the HOA's official account. Subject line: Important Community Alert. The email stated that a disgruntled individual with no ties to the community was attempting to disrupt HOA operations by making false accusations at the upcoming city council meeting. It claimed I had repeatedly violated community standards, refused to pay legally mandated fees, and was now engaging in a harassment campaign against board members. The email urged residents to attend the meeting to show support for the HOA and to protect the integrity of the neighborhood. At the bottom, Brenda's name appeared in bold board president. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Helen with a single word: desperation. Helen called immediately. "She is trying to pack the room with her supporters," she said. "She wants to make you look like the problem. But Marcus, this email is also evidence. She is calling your accusations false before you have even made them. That shows she knows what you are going to say, and she is afraid of it. Let her bring her supporters. The more people who hear the truth, the better." I hung up and looked at the clock. The meeting was tomorrow at 7 p.m. I had 24 hours left, 24 hours before. I walked into that room and put everything on the line. I thought about Brenda's email, about the way she had framed me as the aggressor, the troublemaker, the outsider. She was betting that her reputation, her network, her carefully constructed image of authority would be enough to discredit me. She was betting that people would believe her over a stranger with a stack of documents. But she had made one critical mistake. She had put her lies in writing. She had created a paper trail. And I was going to follow it all the way back to her. I spent the rest of the evening rehearsing my presentation. I practiced speaking clearly, calmly, without anger. I timed myself to stay within the 5-minute public comment window. I anticipated questions and prepared concise answers. By the time I went to bed, I was ready. Not nervous, not uncertain. Ready. Tomorrow. Brenda Sullivan would face daylight she could not control. She had spent years operating in the shadows, using bureaucracy and intimidation to hide what she was doing. But once the light hit, once the truth was spoken in public, in front of witnesses, there would be no taking it back. I closed my eyes, but sleep came slowly, somewhere beneath the calm. I could feel the storm waiting. The city council chambers were packed by the time I arrived at 6:45 p.m. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a flat brightness over rows of folding chairs filled with people I did not know. The air smelled like old carpet and tension. Voices murmured low, cautious, the way they do when everyone is waiting for something to break. I walked down the center aisle carrying my presentation folder and the foam board maps. Brenda Sullivan sat in the front row, arms crossed, her lawyer Trevor Hammond beside her in an expensive suit. She did not look at me. She stared straight ahead, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having lost. I took a seat near the back. Helen Moss arrived a few minutes later and sat beside me. Jake Brennan came in next, followed by Tom Ridley, Paul Jennings, and Grace Milton, one by one. The people who had agreed to stand with me filled the seats around us. Their presence was enough. At 7 p.m. sharp, the city council chairman, Daniel Cross, called the meeting to order. He was in his 60s, gray-haired and deliberate, with the kind of voice that suggested he had spent a lifetime mediating disputes. The first half of the meeting covered routine business, budget approvals, zoning variances. I barely heard any of it. My heart was steady, my hands calm, but I could feel the weight of what was coming pressing down on the room. Finally, Chairman Cross called for public comments. There were 3 speakers registered. I was last. The first 2 were Greenbriar residents who praised the HOA and expressed concern about outside interference. Both speeches felt rehearsed when they finished. Brenda smiled slightly, like she had already won. Then Chairman Cross looked at his clipboard and said, "Marcus Hayes." I stood, gathered my folder and the foam boards, and walked to the podium. The council sat in a semicircle above me, behind me. 80 people watched in silence. I set the maps on an easel beside the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began. "My name is Marcus Hayes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I own 8 acres adjacent to Greenbriar Meadows, purchased legally in June. Over the past 4 months, I have been harassed, threatened, and falsely accused of trespassing on my own property by the Greenbriar Meadows HOA. Tonight, I am here to present evidence that the HOA has engaged in systematic fraud, fabricated boundary maps, and used intimidation to force property owners off their land for financial gain." I saw Brenda stiffen. Trevor Hammond leaned forward, ready to object, but Chairman Cross raised a hand. "Let him finish." I flipped the first foam board to show the side-by-side maps. "This is the original boundary survey from 1987, I said, pointing left. "This is the revised map the HOA claims to have filed this year. The difference is not a clerical error. It is a fabrication." I pulled out Jake's survey report. An independent surveyor confirmed the original boundary markers are still in place. My property is outside the HOA. I checked with the county. There is no record of any approved boundary amendment. The map they are using does not officially exist. The room was silent now. People leaned forward. I continued. "The HOA sent me 3 letters demanding compliance and threatening fines up to $5,000, all based on a fabricated map. But it gets worse." I pulled out Paul's email and read it aloud, slowly and clearly. "Parcel 1158, adjacent to Creek Trail, is the next priority. The owner purchased in June, outside the current boundaries but within the revised zone. Standard pressure sequence violation notices. Fee escalation. Lien threat. They will not survive the legal fees. Closing estimated Q4. Expected margin is 40 to 50%. I looked up at the council, then turned slightly to face the audience. This email was sent by Brenda Sullivan to her husband, Gerald Sullivan, who owns Pinewood Holdings, LLC, Pinewood has purchased at least 4 properties around Greenbriar in the past 3 years, all after the previous owners were harassed by the HOA. This was never about community standards. This was about revenue. A murmur rippled through the room. Brenda's face had gone pale. Trevor Hammond stood up. Chairman Cross, this is defamatory speculation based on unverified documents. I request that Mr. Hayes be removed immediately. Cross did not move. Sit down, Mr. Hammond, he said quietly. I want to hear the rest. I looked back at my notes. 3 people are here tonight who were victims of this scheme. Grace Milton, Robert Sharp, and Linda Frost. All of them lost their properties to Pinewood after being threatened by the HOA. All of them are willing to testify, if you investigate. You will find a pattern: fabricated violations, financial threats, forced sales, and always, Pinewood is waiting to buy. Chairman Cross leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Mr. Hayes, do you have copies of this evidence for the council? I do, I said, and stepped forward to hand him the folder. He flipped through it slowly, his face darkening as he read. After a long moment, he looked up at Brenda. Mrs. Sullivan, do you have a response to these allegations? Brenda stood, her voice tight but controlled. These accusations are baseless. Mr. Hayes is a disgruntled property owner who refuses to follow the rules. The boundary revisions were approved through proper channels, and my husband's business dealings are entirely separate from my role on the board. Cross did not look convinced. Then you will not mind if we request a formal audit of the HOA's boundary filings and financial records, and I will be referring this matter to the county district attorney for investigation. The council will suspend all enforcement actions by Greenbriar Meadows HOA against Mr. Hayes pending the outcome. The room erupted. People were talking, some shouting. Brenda turned and walked toward the exit, her lawyer following. But before she reached the door, she stopped and looked back at me. Her expression was not angry. It was cold, calculating, like she was already planning her next move. Then she was gone. I stood at the podium, my hands still resting on the wood, and felt something release in my chest. Chairman Cross gavelled the room back to order and thanked me for my time. As I walked back to my seat, Grace Milton reached out and squeezed my hand. Tom Ridley nodded. Paul Jennings looked like he might cry. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I stood on the steps of the municipal building and looked up at the sky. The storm I had been bracing for had finally broken, and I was still standing. For once. Silence was on my side, the kind that follows when lies finally run out of breath. Brenda's empire, built on intimidation and paperwork, had crumbled in front of witnesses, and no amount of lawyers or letters could put it back together now. 2 weeks after the city council meeting, I received a call from Chairman Daniel Cross. His voice was calm but deliberate. Mr. Hayes, he said, I wanted to update you on the investigation. The county has completed its audit of the Greenbriar Meadows HOA, and the findings are significant. I sat down at my kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear. What did they find? I asked. The boundary map the HOA used does not exist in any official capacity, he said. There was no application, no hearing, no approval. It was fabricated. The audit also uncovered financial irregularities linking Pinewood Holdings to properties purchased after HOA harassment. The district attorney is investigating fraud, abuse of process, and possibly racketeering. The HOA board has removed Brenda Sullivan as president and asked her to resign entirely. All enforcement actions against you are permanently suspended. The fine is voided. The lien threat is withdrawn. Your property has been formally acknowledged as outside their jurisdiction, and that will be filed with the county permanently. I closed my eyes and let the words settle. It was not just relief. It was vindication. Justice had moved slowly, but it had moved. Thank you, I said quietly. Cross paused. Mr. Hayes, what you did took courage. A lot of people would have walked away. You did not. And because of that, other families are getting justice too. That afternoon, Helen Moss called with more news. The HOA's new council has issued a public apology, she said. They are offering restitution to Grace Milton, Robert Sharp, and Linda Frost, allowing them to repurchase their properties at the original sale price plus compensation. The HOA is covering the costs to avoid further litigation. And Marcus, your record is cleared. Every violation, every accusation, gone. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the mountains. For once, the system had worked. Not quickly, not easily, but it had worked. That evening, Grace Milton called me, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus, she said, they are letting me buy back my mother's property, the land I thought I lost forever. I am going to rebuild there. I told her she did not need to thank me, that she had been brave enough to stand up and testify, and that was what mattered. But she kept talking, her words tumbling out. For 3 years, I thought I was alone. I thought Brenda Sullivan was untouchable, but you proved she was not. You proved that people like us can win if we are willing to fight. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my cabin, the light from the setting sun spilling through the window. This had never been about just me. It had been about every person who had ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, and accept injustice because the other side had more power. It had been about refusing to let that be the end of the story. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail from Tom Ridley, my 70-year-old neighbor. He had written it by hand, his penmanship shaky but clear. Marcus. It read, I have lived on this land for 40 years. I have seen people come and go, but I have never seen anyone stand up the way you did. You did not just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us. You reminded me that the truth still matters, that integrity still matters, and that one person with courage can change everything. Thank you. I folded the letter carefully and set it on my kitchen table. Then I walked outside and stood at the edge of my property, looking west toward Creek Trail Road, where the original iron boundary stake still sat buried in the brush, exactly where it had always been. The truth had been there all along. I had just been the one willing to dig it up. The following week, Helen called with the final update. The district attorney had filed formal charges against Brenda and Gerald Sullivan, fraud, abuse of process, conspiracy, racketeering. Their lawyer had withdrawn, and they were scrambling to find new representation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Jake's survey, Paul's email, the testimony, the audit, the fabricated map. Every lie they had told was now part of the public record, and there was no undoing it. I asked Helen if she had heard anything from Brenda directly. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. She has gone silent. No statements, no interviews. I heard she left town. Gerald, too. They are trying to disappear before the trial, but they cannot run from this. Not anymore. I hung up and thought about that. Brenda Sullivan, who had built her power on intimidation and control, was now hiding. The woman who had stood so confidently in the front row of the city council chambers, who had smiled like she had already won, was gone. Not defeated in public, but erased by her own doing. There was a certain justice in that. I sat on my porch that evening, a mug of tea cooling in my hands, and thought about my father. He had told me not to let anyone make me small. He had told me to find a place where I could breathe, and he had been right all along. Peace is not found by leaving. It is found by standing firm, by refusing to move when someone tries to push you off your own ground, by knowing when a fight is worth having and then seeing it through, no matter how long it takes. I had come to this land looking for escape, for simplicity, for quiet, and I had found it. But not because the world left me alone, because I had defended what was mine, because I had drawn a line and held it. 3 months after the trial began, I stood where I had first hung the no trespass sign. It was early December, the air sharp with cold, the mountains dusted with snow. Everything looked the same as that first morning when the police knocked. But everything had changed. The land was still mine. The boundaries were still clear. But now they were acknowledged, respected, and defended not just by me, but by the law and the people who had stood with me. The fight was over, and I had won. Not because I was stronger than Brenda Sullivan, but because I had refused to let lies become the truth. The trial concluded 2 weeks ago. Brenda Sullivan was convicted on 3 counts of fraud and conspiracy. Gerald Sullivan was convicted of fraudulent business practices and racketeering. Both were sentenced to pay restitution totaling over $300,000 and received suspended jail sentences. Pinewood Holdings was dissolved. All properties purchased under duress were returned. Grace Milton rebuilt her mother's house. Robert Sharp moved his family back. Linda Frost's parents returned to the place they had spent 40 years building. Those were the victories that mattered, not the convictions, but the people who got their lives back. That was justice. Quiet, slow, but real. Tom Ridley stopped by with a handmade wooden plaque. "Thought you might want this," he said. Simple. Clean. With my name and the date etched into oak. Below that, the line holds. Later that day, I walked out to Creek Trail Road, found the iron boundary marker, and mounted the plaque beside it. Not a monument, a reminder. That boundaries matter. That truth matters. That sometimes. The most important thing you can do is refuse to move. On a cold morning in mid-December, I planted a young oak tree on the boundary line, right next to the plaque. Jake Brennan, Paul Jennings, Grace Milton, and others came to help. We dug the hole, set the roots, packed the soil tight. When we were done, we stood looking at the small tree standing alone against the wind. Fragile now, barely 3 feet tall, but it would grow. In 20 years, 50, it would be strong and unmovable, a living marker of the line that had been drawn and held. As the sun set that evening, I stood at the gate, looking at the no trespass sign one last time. Faded now, worn by weather and time, but still there, still standing, just like me. The line held, and so did I. If you have ever been told you do not matter, that you are too small to make a difference, that the other side is too powerful, remember this. One person with truth, courage, and the willingness to stand firm can change everything. You do not need money or connections. You just need to refuse to let lies win. Draw your line. Hold it. Welcome to HOA Chronicles, where we prove that justice is not just for the powerful, it is for anyone brave enough to fight for it.